Call the EMS Commission meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Michelle, if you could do a roll call.
Sure can. Strassman.
Here.
Hilla. Roberts.
Here.
Cronin.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
McHenry.
Here.
Lonsdorf. Schnapp.
Here.
Lugenbull.
Here.
Anderson.
Here.
And Chief Dostalek, Deputy Chief Dostalek. Not here.
We have a quorum. Was there any public comment?
Nothing. Give me 2 seconds.
I am present. I don't know if
Oh.
this is Connie.
Connie is here. No, I had no public comments.
Okay. Then we'll move on to a review and approval of the meeting minutes from April 21st. Any corrections? If not, motion to approve as submitted. A second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion the minutes as submitted are approved. We'll move into the chief's report. Patrick?
Give me 2 seconds to pull it up. Apologize, I know somebody had asked about packets. We're still just getting back into the face-to-face thing, so totally didn't even think about getting packets printed off to share with all of y'all. So there's our chief's report. You can see where zoom in a little bit more. One thing we usually just point out every month is our call volume. So, sorry again. Thank you. Looking at our call volume there, we were down 1% from the previous year, but as you can see, we were still up at 328 calls. So we're still up there at about 3% above for the year. So still looking at about a 4,100 call volume for the year, which is where we were at last year. So not a huge increase, but we're still pretty high. As far as all the rest of the numbers, those municipality numbers are very par for where we're at. As far as our fractal times, again, I've reviewed those just kind of every once in a while. That notified to en route, we look at the two things, right? That median number it gets rid of the extremes for us, but most of the time we're getting out the door in less than 2 minutes, and 90% of the time in less than 2.5, and that's a 0.52. So it's 0.52 minutes, not 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Still, most of the time we're getting to all of our calls within less than 5 minutes. 90% of the time we're getting there in less than 9. And that is actually the standard that we look for our NFPA standards. So getting there in 10 minutes, spending less than 15 minutes on scene, 90% of the time less than 22. Transport times is nothing we can control. And then getting back in service pretty quick. So just a reminder of what those calls look like. We look at those every month and average them over the course of the year. Still looking at about 11 calls a day. Thanks. Our training this month, we actually did near drowning. That actually was yesterday. And then for our department training, we had the team from UW, it's called ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Essentially, it's a fancy name for sort of bypassy type stuff. Very, I want to say new coordinating the pre-hospital. We've been out there for about 1.5 years. Essentially, it's those higher risk patients, usually post-cardiac arrest for kind of some certain conditions that get that emergent bypass. So we call ahead. UW is the only one, at least in our area, that is doing them currently. But we call ahead, wheel them into the emergency room, and they've got that cart there, and they're putting them on bypass the moment we walk in the door. So that team came out and actually did a really phenomenal training for us. Ryan Dockery, one of our medics, actually helped coordinate and set that up. So they came out and did a great job. Nothing really going on in our community events, still kind of slowly getting back into CPR. There's our hours of the day of the week, and calls for service. Still looking at 40, that station number 2 is still our busiest station as we look at continued growth. There's our aging reports. Everything is where it should be. Another kind of, as I reported last month, still catching up on those really busy months with some high acuity calls. So we're starting to see a little bit higher numbers up there as far as our billed amounts than we tend to see because we're getting more acuity, higher acuity calls. Budget numbers are there. If there's any questions on that, that's pretty par for where we're at. The ambulance purchase is hung up there. If you remember, we cashed that CD and put that in our general operating fund. FAP funds are still there. We haven't spent any of those funds. And I actually just completed the FAP, if you remember, is the funding application or funding assistance program. That is money we get from the Department of Human Services for EMS. It is restricted because it's earmarked what we can spend those funds on. There's a pot of that money that must be spent on training, and there's a pot of money that must be spent on essentially unanticipated costs. We cannot budget that money towards something. But we've used it in the past for ventilators, kind of fixing some stuff, I think purchasing some bike equipment. So there's two pots. You'll see it in one lump sum there, but we keep them separate. That application for next year, it functions off of the state fiscal year, which is July 1 to June 30th. So it's always a little bit, right? It's an application process I have to do now for the year that actually hasn't even ended yet. But, in the wisdom of the state, that's how it functions, and then we get our money. But that's what that funding is, and I just filled that application in for next year, and submitted it yesterday. We roughly get usually about $8,000 a year in that. About a third of that goes towards training, and the other third goes kind of in this pot. We are allowed to escrow it and use it for unanticipated purposes. Like I said, last year we used that money to offset what Epic didn't cover for our ventilators. Money market is still just sitting there. Not going to touch that. That'll come due. That first one CD will come due in November. Now that Kyle has retired, this will actually be the first time we actually will be tapping into those accounts, because that's what it was for, is to pay for that post-retirement health care. So later in this year, we will actually see that number go down when that CD comes due. We'll be pulling funds out of that to reimburse our general fund to pay for Kyle's post-retirement health care. And then you will see probably a budget line item in next year's budget that'll start putting funds back into that to help replenish that. Same thing for contract negotiations, which our contract negotiation team met on Tuesday for our first meeting. I met with Greg Bailey will be the new union rep to replace Kyle now that he is retired. I met with Greg actually this morning, kind of discussed what that timeline looks like. So he's going to be working on getting their end of things together so we can start that contract negotiations. But there's $24,000 in that money and that WISC fund as well. To remember that is earmarked for contract negotiations, since that's an expense that we really only occur every 4 years. And that can get pretty pricey. So it comes out of the operational budget, but we budget for it over the course of 4 years, not in 1 year. As far as our milestones go, Sarah is our now, I think, 4th employee who hit 20 years this year. Ryan Dockery hit 16. Andrew Jensen's been a full-timer and part-timer for 9 years. And Zach Kasdorf was one of our LTEs, has just hit 4 years. Those are... as far as the only other stuff I have for my chief's report, as I mentioned last month, we did do a hiring process to fill Kyle's position. We did go through that process. Thank you to the JR and the group that went through that process. I did offer the job to, his name is Donald. He goes by Chip. So Chip Hankley he's one of our LTs, has been one of our LTs for about 2 years. So he's actually going to be our new full-time hire to fill Kyle's position, and he will start May 28th. So he has been an LTE with us for a couple of years, currently runs full-time up in Dells Delton, but lives actually southwest of here, so is more than happy to be moving closer to his work. This is a second career for him, so he'll be a really good fit. The staff kind of concurred with that decision. It will be a very good fit for our organization. Tonight was actually his last night working in the Dells, so he was unable to come do his pinning tonight. But we will get him here next month to do his pinning and swearing in for us to start next month. The other part of the chief's report, which is the in-house operating budget. You can fix that all you want, Scott, so that anybody can see that, or do I need to share it again? Okay. Let me just give you my computer and let you run it. There it is. So this did get emailed out to you. So this is as of the end of April 29th, what we're looking at for as far as where our current expenditures are. A little bit above, so 32.9%. Actually, I don't know that I changed that number. I think 32.9% through the year. I think that was last month's number. I think we're at 38% of through the year with the end of April. So right where we should be for run income, as you can see, that forecast is actually going to be a little bit higher. We'll see what that ends up being. As far as expenditures go, or our run income down here, those are knowns. When we look down here, most everything is within where we would anticipate it to be. With the expected medical supplies already exceeding, even though we jacked that line right up pretty significantly for this year's budget, we are already significantly over it. But it's the same stuff I've been telling you for 3 years. Demand and pricing and cost of things just continues to skyrocket. Other thing that's up there is our fuel. Based on those increasing fuel prices, just over the last couple of months, we've actually seen an impact with that as well. But at the end of the month, if you look at the bottom there, our total expenses, we're still at 32.1% of the year of our expenditures, and we are at 32.9% through the year, or at 38%. So I must have changed that number in there. So our expenditures and income are spot on where they should be. Was there any other lines in there where anybody saw anything that they had questions about?
Question on, what's the external vendor income? I should remember, but.
Sure. So that is where when we assist like Verona Fire buying gloves, we've got some organizations who we purchase AEDs for, and then they reimburse us for it. So
Yeah.
it truly is that pass-through line item. The vendor expenses line doesn't always match up. In theory, the vendor income and the vendor expenses are exactly the same number. It never works that way because it's never tied up at the same time. But that's what that is. Essentially, we're trying not to skew our medical supply line. An AED is about $1,400. I actually have 5 of them on order since January for a couple of area organizations and departments. We just haven't seen them, but that would truly can skew our medical supplies by almost $8,000 and try not to do that. Any other line items in there? Excellent. That's all I have for my chief's report.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Let's move on to chair's reports. Personnel did meet. Sue, if you could do a summary.
I will. So the Personnel Subcommittee did meet prior to this meeting. We reviewed the job descriptions that Patrick sent out. The first one being the EMT internship, and the second one being the EMTA position. We do believe that, knowing that there's a lot of growth coming towards our district, that we would like to recommend and seek approval from the rest of the committee tonight to move forward with those positions. We feel that having these people in these positions, we can start to groom, hopefully, some of these staff and students for our own purposes. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Sue. If there's no questions, we could support a motion to approve the 2 position descriptions as written.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the EMT internship position as well as the EMTA position.
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving them as submitted, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The 2 position descriptions as submitted are approved. And I think, let's see, finance didn't meet this month, so we can move on to discussion on long-term staffing options, which is for discussion only. Do I have? Oh, wait. Oh, I got the wrong one. Oops. Okay, correction. That is for future discussion. We'll move on to a review and approval of accounts payable checks. Everybody get a chance to review the checks? Anybody have any questions, concerns? If not, motion to approve the checks as submitted.
I make a motion to approve the checks as submitted.
A second? Okay, all in favor of approving the checks as submitted by Chief Anderson, signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the checks as submitted are approved. And we'll move on to any other business anybody wants to bring up. If not, I guess I'd like to welcome our new representative from the city of Verona. If you want to just maybe take a minute and introduce yourself to everybody else. And
Sure. Brent Kaiser McHenry. I live in Verona. I've been a EMT, EMS person, whatever we want to call it, for 20 plus years. I have had the great opportunity to also teach in the field for 12 years. So just wanted to keep growing in my ability to serve my community. And this is one way to do it, not on an ambulance. So.
business? If not, might be time for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Well, thank everybody for coming, and the meeting is adjourned. See you next month.